What happened to Bruce Willis' five daughters the women raised not just in the glow of Hollywood, but in the long shadow of a man who became the face of American action, the voice of stoic masculinity, and, quietly, the heart of a blended, fiercely loyal family? This is not a story about red carpets or box office records. It's about the quieter work of fatherhood, done behind closed doors, across multiple households, and through some of the most public chapters of fame and decline. Five daughters born across nearly 3 decades, each arriving in a different season of Bruce Willis' life, and each shaping, challenging, and softening the man who built his legacy with explosions and one-liners, but who found his real purpose in the sound of girls laughing in the next room. The story begins in 1988 with Rumer Willis, born in Paducah, Kentucky, while her father was filming in country and her mother, Demi Moore, was rising fast in her own right. Bruce was already America's reluctant movie star fresh off moonlighting, on the verge of Die Hard, and Rumer was born into a rare space between domesticity and stardom. Rather than raise their daughter in Los Angeles, Bruce and Demi chose Haley, Idaho, a quiet mountain town that offered more snow than paparazzi. There, Rumer's earliest years were defined not by Hollywood chaos, but by a kind of self-imposed stillness. She roamed wide-open landscapes, attended small schools, and lived with the kind of rural freedom most celebrity kids never tasted. But the separation between that peace and the larger world couldn't last. By the time Rumer was 5, she was already stepping into frame, appearing briefly in her mother's film, Now and Then under a pseudonym, and later playing Moore's daughter again in Striptease. These cameos weren't about pushing her into fame. They were about proximity, about being where her parents were on set, under lights, in orbit. As the family moved back toward the West Coast in the early 90s, Rumer was caught between two climates, the cold clarity of Idaho and the blinding heat of Hollywood. By adolescence, she was living in Los Angeles, attending Wildwood Secondary, and rubbing shoulders with the children of icons. Riley Keough, Dakota Johnson, kids raised on first names and famous faces. That transition hit hard. Online comments, cruel and constant, dissected her looks before she understood what self-worth even meant. The tabloid culture of the early 2000s was brutal to girls, and Rumer, born to 2 megastars, became a quiet target. She tried to mold herself into what they wanted: thinner, more polished, more feminine, until she realized there was nothing on the other end of that tunnel but exhaustion. College came briefly. She enrolled at USC in 2006, but left after a semester to return to the industry that both shaped and scarred her. She took roles in films like The House Bunny and Sorority Row, earning her place more through persistence than privilege. Over time, she developed range dramatic parts, musical performances, a Broadway debut as Roxy Hart in Chicago, and a win on Dancing with the Stars that reminded the public she was more than a surname. She also made the quiet, radical decision to go sober, not in reaction to addiction, but as a commitment to clarity. By 2023, she had entered a new role entirely. Mother Rumer gave birth to her daughter Louetta in a calm, unmedicated home birth, bringing the 3rd generation of Willis women into the fold. The relationship with the child's father didn't last, but Rumer's commitment to both co-parenting and self-possession only deepened. She had grown up under the scrutiny of strangers and come out the other side not unscathed, but unshaken. 3 years after Rumer's birth came Scout LaRue Willis, born in the summer of 1991 in Sun Valley, Idaho. Like her sister, Scout was raised far from the chaos of Los Angeles, but the artistic DNA was inescapable. She appeared in The Scarlet Letter and Breakfast of Champions as a child, but her true language was always closer to fine art and defiant expression than film. Scout grew up with a sharp mind and a questioning spirit. She attended Brown University, graduating in 2013 with the kind of academic polish that often surprises people who only see the last name. But even as a student, Scout was already testing the boundaries of public image. She staged art exhibitions, challenged Instagram's censorship rules by walking topless through New York City, and turned her own body into a canvas for commentary. Her work wasn't shock for attention. It was carefully constructed dissent through music, photography, and performance. Scout made clear that being a Willis didn't mean being invisible or compliant. It wasn't until her 30s, however, that Scout truly found her lane. She taught herself guitar, began writing her own songs, and in 2021 released her debut single, a raw, haunting track titled Love Without Possession. It was less pop star ambition and more emotional exorcism. The following year, she released a full album that blended vulnerability with rage, spirituality with sensuality. Her voice wasn't just melodic, it was anchored. Her Instagram, filled with art, animals, and rare family glimpses, showed a woman more interested in process than attention. In the summer of 2021, Scout posted a photo with both parents to mark her 30th birthday, a quiet, smiling image of a family that had been pulled in different directions, but had somehow stayed connected. Because while Bruce and Demi had divorced back in 1998, their parenting never fractured. Scout, like Rumer, grew up watching their parents rebuild something even rarer than a marriage: enduring friendship. Then came Tallulah Willis, born in 1994 in Los Angeles, the youngest of the three Moore Willis daughters, and for many years, the most fragile. Her early childhood echoed the others' rural Idaho, private life, but by the time she was 9, the family had fully shifted back into LA culture, and the spotlight, already warm on her sisters, grew scorching by the time Tallulah hit adolescence. She didn't handle it with the same armor. Online comments about her appearance sank deeper. At 13, she was already spiraling, criticizing herself, developing eating disorders, losing her sense of value. By college, she was struggling openly with drugs and depression, and yet in that lowest valley, something remarkable happened. Her sisters intervened. She entered treatment, not dragged but encouraged, and emerged with a new kind of clarity. The road wasn't straight, but it was upward. Tallulah began to rebuild with humor, with honesty, and with a kind of radical transparency about mental health that felt both modern and generational. She launched a fashion brand, Willis, during the pandemic, a clothing line that folded her art into its seams and wrapped its message in kindness and healing. She told the press she wanted it to stand for safety, for softness, for strength. And while the fashion world took notice, it was her personal writing, open, vulnerable, occasionally chaotic, that gave her real voice. After being diagnosed with autism in 2023, she shared the news publicly, not as explanation, but as affirmation. She also became one of the first to speak out in detail about Bruce's declining health. Her piece in Vogue described the moment she realized she'd never get a wedding speech from her father, the kind of emotional clarity that only comes when denial collapses, and yet, even in that grief, there was movement. She got engaged in 2024 and plans to walk down the aisle with Bruce by her side, not the man he once was, but the father she still calls hers. That's where this chapter closes, with 3 daughters, each forged in a different fire, all standing shoulder to shoulder in the face of a legacy that was never just about fame, it was always about family. As the first 3 Willis daughters navigated fame, identity, and the delicate weight of growing up in public, a second act of fatherhood was quietly beginning for Bruce Willis. After years of high-profile parenting with Demi Moore, and an enduring friendship that surprised even Hollywood, Bruce remarried in 2009. His new wife, Emma Hemming, wasn't just a model. She was, in many ways, the anchor he had never found during the whirlwind of his earlier career. The age gap was notable, but the bond was undeniable. With Emma came a second chance, a new household, a quieter rhythm, and eventually 2 more daughters who would arrive not under the glare of the 90s tabloid circus, but in a house built intentionally for peace. Mabel Willis was born on April 1, 2012, as Bruce entered his late 50s. This wasn't Bruce, the action hero, or Bruce the heartthrob. It was Bruce the man who had already seen the edges of stardom, the inside of regret, and the beauty of small, consistent love. Mabel came into the world at the perfect time. Her parents had traded Los Angeles for Bedford Hills, a small town north of New York City, where yards were wide, fences were low, and privacy wasn't a negotiation. It was chosen in that setting Bruce Willis became something his older daughters had rarely seen. A stay-at-home dad, he danced in the kitchen, read bedtime stories, showed up to piano recitals. The man who once strutted through fireballs on screen now spent his afternoons being corrected during board games and taught TikTok dances by an 8-year-old who barely understood what Die Hard was. Mabel, vibrant and curious, soaked it all in. She loved Broadway shows, family bowling nights, and peppered her parents with questions about life, science, and eventually business. One day, she announced that she wanted to be a shark on Shark Tank, and no one in the house doubted she could do it. She had her mother's focus, her father's timing, and the boundless security of a family that didn't need to prove anything anymore. In photos, she beamed beside her father who, by this point, was no longer chasing roles, but chasing moments. 2 years later, on May 5, 2014, Evelyn Penn Willis joined the family. She was born into a home already full of joy, but with her arrival, that joy deepened into something warmer, more protective. If Mabel brought energy, Evelyn brought curiosity. She asked big questions. She loved roller coasters, sewing, Star Wars, a girl who built her own odd little world and welcomed others into it. During the pandemic, while much of the world was unraveling, Evelyn learned how to ride a bike. The moment she ditched her training wheels, her whole family, including Moore and her half-sisters, stood in the driveway cheering her on. That image, rarely seen in Hollywood families fractured by remarriage, became the new normal for the Willis clan. Holidays, birthdays, Sunday afternoons. The entire brood often gathered under one roof, and Bruce, always at the center, no longer needed to be the loudest voice in the room. He just needed to be in the room. As Evelyn got older, she began to understand more about the world and about her father's changing condition. In 2022, the family announced that Bruce had been diagnosed with aphasia, a disorder affecting his ability to communicate. The news was heartbreaking, but it wasn't isolating. The family shared the update together, signed by Emma, Demi, and all 5 daughters. That unity wasn't just for show. It was real. It was visible in the way Evelyn responded. She began researching dementia facts on her own, even learning that hydration was essential for brain function. One afternoon, she gently reminded her mother to always keep water near her dad. Emma didn't just smile, she wrote the moment down. It was love expressed through care, through education, through the smallest gesture of compassion. Evelyn, not yet a teenager, had already grasped something profound, that love is presence, even when words start to fail. As Bruce's condition progressed, the family changed with it. Emma became the household's steady pulse, while Mabel and Evelyn adjusted to new routines. New ways of communicating. The older sisters, especially Rumer and Tallulah, made frequent visits not just out of obligation, but because they understood the importance of memory, both shared and borrowed. And when Rumer had her own daughter in 2023, Louetta, Evelyn and Mabel stepped into the role of young aunts with the same mixture of awe and playfulness that Bruce once brought to them. That next generation became the latest layer of a legacy that had shifted from red carpets to front lawns, from premieres to porch swings. By 2024, Mabel was 13, creative, bright, occasionally defiant in the way teenagers are supposed to be. Evelyn was 11, thoughtful, imaginative, and still quietly processing what it meant to watch a father slowly step back from the world. And Bruce, though quieter, was still very much present. He sat with them during family meals, watched movies he no longer quoted, and smiled in ways that didn't require language. The girls learned to read his expressions like sheet music. They knew when he needed space, when he wanted laughter, and when he was simply soaking in the sound of their voices. His life had become smaller, but it hadn't become less. These final chapters of Bruce's fatherhood are defined not by what he can say, but by what he built. A family stitched together not by convention, but by commitment. 5 daughters, 2 mothers, 1 family. No scandal, no feud, just recalibration over and over again. Mabel and Evelyn, born during his quiet years, now carry the light he once burned through recklessly. They didn't inherit the chaos, they inherited the calm. And while the world still remembers Bruce Willis as a cinematic icon, his daughters, all five, remember something else entirely. They remember bedtime voices and dumb dad jokes, dance parties in the kitchen, and quiet afternoons spent shoulder to shoulder. They remember a man who gave them everything he had left. And most of all, they remember that even as the world began to forget, they never did. As Mabel and Evelyn grew into their own rhythm of adolescence, the five Willis daughters, separated by decades, geography, and vastly different childhoods, began to orbit each other more closely than ever before. What once seemed like two families divided by time and remarriage had over the years formed something that felt more like a constellation, each daughter shining in her own right, yet drawn together by a gravity stronger than DNA. Their shared love of the same complicated, quietly generous man, Bruce Willis, now living in the slower haze of frontotemporal dementia, no longer led the household in the way he once did, but in his absence of speech, a new language formed. Gestures, laughter, eye contact. Family dinners where the noise wasn't about him anymore, but never excluded him. And each of his daughters, in her own way, responded to this shift with a different kind of devotion. Rumer, the eldest, stepped fully into a maternal role, not just with her own child, Louetta, but with the emotional stewardship of the entire family's memory. She became the unofficial family historian, posting tributes, organizing visits, and carrying Bruce's presence into the next generation with care. It wasn't performance, it was preservation. Her journey from insecure teenager to Broadway star to single mother had shaped her into someone who understood the value of legacy, not as image, but as connection. And that meant keeping the threads between her siblings strong. Scout, meanwhile, leaned even harder into creation. Her music took on new resonance, raw, aching, deliberate. In interviews, she didn't pretend everything was okay. She acknowledged the weight of watching a parent disappear slowly, not into death, but into forgetfulness. Still, she played on her songs, carried grief without self-pity, and strength without bravado. In family gatherings, she often brought humor, the kind that cuts tension without erasing it. She knew when to crack a joke, when to pour a drink, and when to simply be still beside her father. She had once walked topless through New York City in protest of censorship. Now she was quietly documenting the intimate bravery of watching a strong man soften and loving him anyway. Tallulah, once the wildest card of the three eldest, emerged in many ways as the most unexpectedly grounded. Sobriety had sharpened her. Diagnosis had clarified her. And heartbreak, the kind that came with watching a parent fade while planning a wedding, had deepened her. She still made strange, beautiful clothes. She still spoke candidly about mental health. But there was a new layer beneath the neon, a resilience that came not from rebellion, but from reconciliation. When she got engaged in 2024, it wasn't with fanfare. It was with the quiet, fierce hope that her dad could still walk her down the aisle. Not to speak, not to toast, just to be there. That was enough. She understood now, maybe more than ever, that presence doesn't always need words. As for Mabel and Evelyn, they lived on the front lines of Bruce's new reality. They saw the daily shifts, the pauses, the forgotten phrases, and yet their lives were still full of joy. They rollerbladed through the house. They watched Star Wars marathons. They sewed new projects and danced in the living room while their father watched with a quiet smile. They learned how to explain dementia to their friends at school without shame. They learned how to hold their mother's hand when she looked tired. They learned how to make space for grief without letting it swallow them. Their childhood wasn't charmed in the traditional Hollywood sense. It was marked by reality, softened by love. And through it all, Emma Hemming Willis held the frame together, not as a replacement for Moore, not as a competitor, but as a woman who understood that blended families aren't patchwork they're woven over the years. She and Demi had built something rare: mutual respect, open communication, and a shared mission to honor Bruce's legacy without clinging to the past. Photos of the full family together at holidays, in shared cabins, around birthday cakes weren't PR stunts. They were proof that when love is bigger than ego, healing is possible, and that healing stretched across generations. When Rumer brought her baby girl into the fold, Evelyn and Mabel became doting aunts, and Bruce, even through foggy moments, responded to Louetta's laughter like a compass finding north. The sound of that baby seemed to wake something in him, a memory not lost, just buried. His daughters noticed. They noticed everything, because each of them had once fought to be seen by the world on their own terms. And now, as women, they were seeing their father in a new way, not as the icon or the invincible figure they'd once imagined, but as a man who had given them all the tools to love harder, laugh louder, and live deeper. He had built his fame on strength, but his legacy was softness. 5 daughters, each born in a different era, each raised with different expectations, each carrying different scars, but in the end, all choosing to stay, all choosing to show up. So what happened to Bruce Willis' 5 daughters? They became artists, activists, designers, mothers, caregivers, aunts. They became voices for mental health, bodies of work, protectors of memory. They did not escape the spotlight. They reshaped it. They did not reject their father's fame. They redefined it. And most of all, they chose to keep loving, not because it was easy, but because it was real. In a world that often reduces legacy to film credits and red carpet photos, the Willis daughters remind us that the truest legacy is what lives in the quiet moments. In the kitchen, in the silence, in the steady presence of those who choose to stay long after the cameras are gone. If you found this breakdown powerful and want more deep dives into the hidden lives of Hollywood's forgotten children, subscribe to our channel. Your support brings these invisible stories to light. Thanks for listening.